Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Civil War and Ghost Stories. Don't forget to leave a review and share the podcast with other history lovers. As always, I am incredibly grateful for your support. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The old Charleston Exchange and Provost Dungeon was constructed from 1767 to 1771 with stone imported from England. For almost 100 years, it acted as the Charleston military headquarters. It was enclosed as part of the walled city for fear of attack by Native Americans, the French, Spanish, and pirates. Part of that wall is still located in the dungeon and can be seen today. During the time that the British occupied Charleston from 1780 to 1782, three signers of the Declaration of Independence were imprisoned in the dungeon. Those signers were Arthur Middleton, Thomas Hayward Jr., and Edward Rutledge. The underground jail and dungeon held many prisoners from the Revolutionary War, runaway slaves, pirates, and sadly women and children, too. Many died in these cramped and terrible conditions. So, it's no surprise in a place with this kind of history that visitors have reported seeing and hearing strange things. Moans and the sound of clinking chain often fill the silence, and people have reported feeling cold spots or their clothing being pulled by an unseen force. Lots of ghost tours occur in this dungeon, and during a visit to the dungeon with his family several years ago, Sam Jenkins reached out and grabbed one of the chains on display. He felt compelled to do it, but he doesn't know why. As he was holding the chain in his hand, a strange feeling came over him, and the weight was almost suffocating. An employee noticed what Sam had done and told him that him and his family needed to leave immediately, which Sam was all too happy to do. That night, as Sam goes to bed, he has a strange dream. In his dream, he was chained in a dank, dark room. The smell of rot and feces filled the air. It was too dark to see, but he noticed chains digging into his wrists and ankles. He heard people moaning and the rattling of chains, but couldn't make anything out. When Sam finally awoke from this nightmare, he thought, maybe I had this dream because of the tour last night. But what was really strange is that Sam's wrists and ankles were sore. He figured it must be his mind playing tricks on him. But then the next night, Sam had the exact same dream. And the night after that, and the night after that. In fact, Sam Jenkins has had this exact same dream for the last 20 years. It's always the same. There's never a real beginning or a real end. But Sam is always chained up in that dark room of misery. And when Sam wakes up in the morning, his wrists and ankles always ache. So, the takeaway here is that especially when you're visiting a supernatural place, you need to be very careful of what you touch. You have no idea what might decide to come home with you. Our next ghost story is about the F.W. Wagener Building. This beautiful Victorian building was built in 1880 by F.W. Wagener, and it was used to house his many businesses. Eventually, the floors were opened up to other businesses, and George Poirer, a cotton magnate, rented out the top floor to run his cotton business. George's family was very wealthy in the cotton industry, but unfortunately, George was not a savvy businessman. Having inherited the business from his parents, George proceeded to burn through his wealth and ultimately ruin the family business. To add to it, the introduction of the invasive boll weevil destroyed much of the cotton fields in the South, leaving George with little hope of salvation. In one last attempt to save the family business, George took his last remaining crop and sold it to an English company. It needed to be shipped overseas, so George oversaw the packing of the cotton onto the ship, and then he proceeded to walk to his office building to see the ship take off in the harbor from the window. As George is watching from the third story, all of a sudden smoke starts billowing out of the ship. George is watching in hopeless desperation as the sailors are leaping from the ship, as the ship is engulfed in flames, and ultimately George's last hope of salvation is burned before his eyes. Realizing that this was his last shred of hope, George is distraught and decides to kill himself. He takes his leather chair and he stands on it. He takes a rope and throws it over the rafters, ties it to his neck, and kicks the chair out. It would be 3 days until someone would realize what George had done. A local newspaper boy was walking the streets when he happened to look up into the window and see George's body swinging in the rafters. The newspaper boy alerted their authorities and George's body was taken down. In the 1980s, that building was converted into a restaurant. And being that it was a restaurant, it really only needed the first and second floor, so the third floor where George's office was became storage. However, many guests of the restaurant and employees talked about seeing and hearing George's ghost. Things such as cold spots and a feeling of being watched would be regular talk around the restaurant. Some were even lucky enough to see George's shadow swinging from the rafters. But the scariest encounter occurred when the manager, James McAllister, was working one night, and he heard a thud coming from the third floor. Knowing that the third floor was storage, James decided to check it out just in case something happened. So when James went up to the third floor, he noticed that a box had fallen from the stack of other boxes. James began looking for something to climb on to put the box back. He couldn't find like a step ladder or anything like that, but all of a sudden, there was a leather desk chair. James said, I'd never seen that here before, but whatever. So he grabbed the chair and he pulled it over to the stack. As soon as James placed the box on top of the stack, all of a sudden the chair was kicked out from underneath him. James fell down hard onto the floor, nearly impaling himself on the metal cabinet. Freaked out by this, James went downstairs and he told the other managers what had happened. All three men agreed that that was strange that that chair popped up. Then it finally hit them. They realized that that was the exact same chair that George Poirer used to hang himself. Now, what's very odd is that in 2026, after that restaurant closed down, no other business has been able to survive in that location. And it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots to George's failed business and all the other failed businesses thereafter. Thank you for joining me on Civil War and Ghost Stories. If you enjoyed today's tale, follow the podcast and leave a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It keeps these stories alive, and maybe the spirits too. Remember, the veil between our world and theirs is thin, sometimes just a whisper away. If you ever feel a cold spot or a tap on your shoulder, tread carefully. And remember, don't touch what isn't yours. History leaves its mark, and those marks can reach across time in ways that we don't expect. Stay curious, but stay cautious. And join me next time as we uncover more haunting truths behind the American Civil War. You won't want to miss what's waiting.